Hello gamers, welcome back, or in case you are new here, I'm NKZL. In this video I will do a deeper dive into Amazon's game studio and why they are the worst MMO publisher out there. I know there are a lot of you that are automatically thinking of publishers that might contest this infamous title, especially in the MMO genre. Sadly, we had a lot of companies that did a bad job, like Nexon, NCSoft, My.com, Gamivo, and so on. But we will go over AGS's history, and hopefully by the end of the video you will be convinced why they are the very worst. These other companies, more often than not, are greedy, but that means that you know what to expect. There is logic to their actions, so you can predict things. However, to use a geek terminology, AGS is chaotically evil. Often enough there is no logic to their actions and you never know what to expect. In most fantasy stories, when we encounter this kind of madness, at least it's funny or entertaining, like Sheogorath in Elder Scrolls. But this is not fantasy, it's all just incredibly sad. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details, I need to make a little disclaimer. I'm not going to talk about every single thing they did wrong, because this video would end up being 10 or 20 hours long. I will talk about the major elements that are necessary to show you a consistent pattern of behavior and how they didn't actually learn from their failures. I also want to acknowledge that there are definitely companies that are worse in every way, like all those crowdfunded scam MMOs. However, by now most people should know that those are scams and stay away. While a brand with Amazon backing carries implicit trust with it, and it has potential to secure contracts with massive developers, so their incompetence has much bigger implications. Another thing that needs to be made perfectly clear is that this video is not calling AGS unsuccessful. There will be people who might say AGS is unsuccessful, and on the opposite side there are those that will say that if they were this bad, they wouldn't be allowed to continue. Both of these perspectives are wrong. Simply because of Amazon's brand and reach, they managed to sell an astronomical amount of copies of New World and in-game purchases. And because of the same reasons, they managed to secure contracts for publishing rights of highly anticipated games like Lost Ark and Throne and Liberty. This made it so they generate a lot of income. From a purely financial standpoint, AGS is an extremely successful enterprise. However, what I am alleging is that both their games and those games that they published would have been considerably more profitable, and they would have been much better experiences for gamers if they were not as incompetent as they are. The last thing that I need to mention is that I do not know for sure why they are this bad at their job. I am just making the point that they are incompetent. As for the reasons, we are all free to guess. It could be because they are lazy, it could be that all the leadership has dementia, it could be 100 other reasons. You are free to draw your own conclusions, and you can also let me know what your theory is. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you enjoy my content, hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to reach 100 billion subscribers and get that meteorite or YouTube button. Jokes aside, if you enjoy my content and hit subscribe, you'll be kept up to date with my content, obviously, but more importantly, I get a better reach on YouTube, and as a direct result, I will be allowed into more tests for games, which I really like. Anyway, let's get into it. Amazon started this endeavor when it created its own application store in 2011 and started hiring developers for social games. This discussion is focused on computer games mostly, and nothing relevant came out at this time, just some small games, mostly for Facebook or mobile. However, in 2014, they started hiring developers for computer games, and by 2016, at TwitchCon they revealed 3 games: BreakAway, Crucible, and New World. So let's talk about those 3 titles first. BreakAway was a battle arena style sports game where 2 teams of 4 players faced against each other, trying to score goals. It was basically a Rocket League with abilities. This game never had a public testing phase, just some private testing, and from what I have seen, people that got to play it believed it had potential and was fun, just needed more work, which is normal for that stage of development. AGS ended up cancelling it back in March 2018, which, even if rare, happens sometimes in the gaming industry. Getting games to that stage of development is expensive. However, no matter how much money you throw at a project, what you truly need is vision. Having long-term vision for a game is, in my opinion, the most important element of live service games. And AGS lacked that vision here. Put a pin in this problem because it is a recurring theme with AGS. The next game is Crucible, which ended up getting released in very early development state on Steam in the year 2020. It was a mix between MOBA and Battle Royale. While it was in early development and it had a long way to go, the game was pretty enjoyable. I had a chance to play it, and while it was clearly incomplete and lacking, overall I can say I had a good time with it. Sadly, the game was very little advertised, so not a lot of people knew about it. On top of that, it had multiple very serious problems. One of those was that it had no in-game communication, something that should never ever be the case for a team game. And while I cannot find where they said this now, maybe it was in Discord, I clearly remember AGS responding that they do not want to add the chat functionality because people might be mean to each other, despite that being the most requested feature. They eventually added it when it was too late. Things like this show us what their focus was on. Instead of being focused on creating a good game, they were focused on irrelevant and stupid shit like that. Almost every multiplayer game out there has a chat feature. They also have a block feature for when people are being abusive. It's simply unbelievable that the game development team had such a hard time with something so basic as a chat function. It's like seeing someone claim to be a car mechanic and then not knowing how to inflate a tire. If I didn't experience this for myself, I would simply find it unbelievable. Since they were focused on irrelevant stuff, updates were very slow, so the population dwindled, probably looking to return to the game when they actually finished developing it, or when they stopped focusing on irrelevant stuff and developed the game further. However, nobody got to do that, because later in 2020, this became the second game that was verified in the development cycle that they shut down. This is the first time where we see that the leadership of the studio understood nothing about gaming and were focusing on irrelevant things. Of course, this is also the second time when they had no vision or desire to see a game through. Instead of learning from feedback and focusing on improving their product, they decided to shut it down. But these things happen. Game development has ups and downs. So let's move on to the next game they developed. It's time to talk about New World. I'm sure most gamers at least heard about it. It initially was meant to be a sort of open-world survival game, but it had a disastrous alpha. The feedback was overwhelmingly negative. Maybe because they couldn't suffer another massive loss, they shifted development towards an MMORPG. These things happen. For example, Fortnite was not meant to be a battle royale, but because they shifted development at the right time, it became one of the most popular games ever. Anyway, just like their other games, New World had a fantastic foundation. It had a gorgeous world, a good base for combat, a good base for crafting, like the ability to interact with most bushes, trees, rocks, and so on. However, the game suffered, and still to this day suffers, from the fact that the vast majority of elements in-game are just surface level. Back when the game launched, people understandably were asking for mounts, which is a basic feature in almost all MMORPGs. At the time, they stated that the world was too small, which is complete nonsense. But another more believable reason that a lot of us bought into was that they wanted to provide an in-depth mount system that will take more time to develop than a basic one. Fast forward 2 years, they provided a mount system that is basically a speed buff with extra models and animations. It's not in-depth like the one found in Black Desert Online. It doesn't have the intricate quest lines and unique abilities like the one in Guild Wars 2. Both the system and the activities attached to it are extremely basic. Something that could have been developed in a few weeks or a few months at worst, not something that they worked on for years. This is just an easy example. Sadly, everything else in game suffers from the same problem. The people making decisions look around at other games and copy various things, but they do so without understanding why those things are successful or enjoyed by players. The game has the worst character creator in the genre. The gearing system is fundamentally flawed, and because of it, the crafting system that could have been easily the best in the industry became a shallow and terrible system. Their idea of open world spontaneous activity is entering a cave and being attacked by 3 wolves. I could go on and on about the thousands of things they did wrong and how almost everywhere you look in game they simply cannot do a proper job. When a game is new, some of these problems might be something that it goes through, growing pains. Every popular MMO went through some of this. But it is normal to expect for the developers to gather feedback and, more importantly, to slowly gain experience and understand things, and as a direct result, make better content and even go back and fix their shortcomings. With very few things they did, like with the main quest, but with the vast majority they did not. Please don't misunderstand me. Most of these elements in New World are not far from being good, but the distance makes them bad. It's like a bike that is missing the wheels. It's so close, almost there, but without those wheels, it is just a piece of junk. It's been almost 4 years since New World released, and 4 years it is way too much time for the game to be in the state it is in now, so I am not holding any hope that things will improve. At least they will not improve enough. To make a short mid-video summary, we can see a pattern with these 3 games. Have great foundations, but they lack the understanding and vision to follow through and create something extraordinary, or at the very least something good on top of that foundation. However, this video is not about them being the worst developers, because they're not. It's about them being the worst publisher. And maybe all these failed development projects are actually the fault of the publisher side. So let's talk about the things they did as the publisher. AGS has published Lost Ark in 2022 and Throne and Liberty in 2024. These are games developed by Smilegate and respectively NCSoft, not directly by AGS. However, as publisher, they had a lot of control in how things are in these games. For example, in Lost Ark, they went and censored various elements of the game and they modified things. In Throne and Liberty, they changed drop rates and drop locations. It is safe to say that they have an overwhelming amount of control over things in these games. They also should have published Blue Protocol, but they dragged their feet and now the game is shut down in the East and has been bought by a Chinese company. It is uncertain if they will be the publisher for the remade version. Publishers are usually in charge of things like support, translation, communications, social media, game masters and community managers, monetization, in and out of game events, and many other small elements that maintain a game. Developers make the game and publishers keep it functional. Basically, if the developers add a new tree to the game, the publisher is responsible for when the tree gets added to the live version and is meant to make sure that players interact with the tree in the intended way. If players find the tree ugly, boring, or the tree is broken, the publisher side is responsible for collecting that feedback and providing it to the developers. So let's see which of these responsibilities they fail and how they do so. Social media and communication overall can be subjective. Some people want updates every week, others don't care at all. However, one very important element that we should all be able to agree on is that communication must be truthful. Without that basis, the communication becomes a massive negative and they are better off not communicating anything. When communication is not truthful, trust is broken, and this relationship between gamers and game companies is not on equal footing. Most of the time, a single gamer cannot hold the company responsible, which means trust is even more important than in a normal relationship. Anyway, with all 3 games that they are actively managing right now, they have lied about things like bots, exploits, bugs, they constantly overpromise and underdeliver, they miss deadlines, the patch notes are almost never complete or accurate, just to name a few of the most prevalent problems. Anyone can make a mistake, but when they happen all the time, it's no longer a mistake, and it can be assumed that it is intentional, or in the best case scenario, it is gross incompetence. I played all 3 of these games, and in all 3 of them, the vast majority of people that I play with stopped reading the communication because it could not be trusted. Which brings me to my next point. The publisher is in charge of maintaining a fair environment and making sure the player base is adhering to the rules. Well, all 3 games had problems with bots, cheaters, exploiters, and real money trading. to real money trading, this is an issue that is extremely hard to manage, if not impossible. So since the vast majority of companies out there do not have a solution for this, and even when they do have a solution, it just marginally helps the situation and not actually fix it, I will not fault them for this. However, the other problems do have solutions, and AGS has refused to implement them. The biggest issue that everyone can see, and it directly affects players, is bots. If a company respects themselves and wants to offer a decent gameplay experience, they will deal with this problem. In today's day and age, one of the worst things you can do to an MMO is make it free to play. This basically opens the floodgates for bots. AGS did just this with Lost Ark, and then despite this having absolutely terrible results for their game, they did the same thing 2 years later with Throne and Liberty. If you want your game to be easily accessible, a way to have your cake and eat it too is to simply have a $1 price tag and ban any duplicate credit cards used. This does not 100% stop the bots, but it has a massive impact on the number of bots. I would say this probably solves over 90% of the bot problem. AGS keeps claiming they are trying to deal with bots, but then they turn around and refuse to implement the simplest solution that would help. For the remaining bots, cheaters and exploiters, companies have various ways to deal with them, from in-game GMs to analyzing the backend data. Any company that respects themselves has a zero tolerance policy. AGS does not. They employ a maximum tolerance policy. Even when they catch cheaters and exploiters, they either just warn them or ban them for a few days. And to make things even worse, they almost always let them keep their ill-gotten gains, which is absolute madness. I've been playing MMOs for over 25 years and I do not know of another company that catches cheaters and then lets them keep the things they cheated for. This has been their policy across all 3 games, so it is safe to assume that it is their core belief that people that ruin these games should be allowed to ruin them further with a slap on the wrist in the best case scenario. They do not redeem themselves in other responsibilities either. Their support is terrible. I only interacted with them once and they were nice and cordial, but completely useless. And all the other interactions I have heard about from friends and even random people have always seemed to have a similar outcome. Support was nice, but failed to fix their problem. There might indeed be cases out there where they did, since people don't usually talk or post about their good interactions. However, I think this is expected, and when it comes to support, it is actually their failures that define them. Another major publisher responsibility that they fail is providing adequate servers, and this is a company with the Amazon brand backing, so they should have access to some of the best and most powerful servers in the world. Somehow, every single game they launch has massive server problems. They are just unable to perform this duty properly. At the beginning of the video, I called them chaotically evil, and the reason is these problems like bots, exploiters, cheaters and servers actively hurt their games, and as a direct result they are losing massive amounts of money over these problems, and of course gaining a negative reputation. So it can be said that they are not even acting in their best interest. But there's more. Not only are they unable to complete their normal responsibilities, but like every incompetent person out there, they consider themselves exceptionally capable. So they interfere with various things in these games that they should not. I mentioned previously that they like to censor things. The problem is that it is done in a very illogical way. For example, they went and censored various costumes, armors, transformations, and even NPCs in Lost Ark. And afterwards, they released bikini skins in the cash shop. Make it make sense. As an artistically challenged person, I would never dare to interfere with the work of art of someone else. And games are works of art. For better or worse, developers should be the ones to express their vision without the interference of these talentless frauds. Some people out there don't see games as work of art and they only care about gameplay, so they will overlook something like that. However, in Throne and Liberty they went further and messed with things they shouldn't have. They messed with the drop rates, drop locations, how item acquisition works, and many other small aspects. At launch, the game was objectively worse than the Korean version. But maybe not worse enough, because after they released their first expansion, they did it again, and much worse this time. In an attempt to stretch out content, they have made almost all the game feel extremely unrewarding, and it is now a chore to play. Everything that was once enjoyable and remotely fun has now become a waste of time. Another game that I personally played and that I considered enjoyable and I could happily recommend to others got ruined by their interference. All these things that I discussed in the video raises the question, at least in my head, if they interfered with these games that are not developed by them and had such a massive negative impact on them, how much did they interfere with the games developed by their own company? What if all those developers that worked for Amazon Game Studio wanted to make great games, had great ideas, as we have seen by those excellent fundamental aspects of those games? But these people on the publisher side that are seemingly in charge of everything shut them down and force them to make bad decisions. I strongly believe that when marketing executives are in charge of a game, it results in the game being worse. And the opposite is also true. We have plenty of examples of games that are extremely successful, and more often than not, the ones making decisions in those games are not marketing people, but developers with vision and passion. Just think of whatever game you consider really good, and then look up who's in charge. Anyway, let's bring it back to the topic. I think all this shows that AGS is the worst publisher in the MMO space, and that they have proven so far without any doubt that they are extremely incompetent, and whenever they mess with something, they make it worse. They have very few redeemable qualities to speak of. Their actions are illogical and against their best interest, but more importantly, against us as gamers. With all this in mind, I have one more thing to talk about, and it is related to the future and to upcoming titles. They have previously announced they are working on a Lord of the Rings MMO, and I know a lot of people will be excited when they hear about a new Lord of the Rings MMO. Even knowing all this, I will probably give it a try when it comes out, but realistically, I have very little hope that it will be good, and I have almost no hope that AGS will not repeat the same mistakes again. Also, the second title I wanted to mention is Aeon 2. This is a game made by NCSoft, and I know a lot of people are waiting for it. Personally, I hope they do not work with AGS again, but they already worked with them for Throne and Liberty, so there is a good chance that they will also publish Aeon 2 globally. It makes me sad. It makes me not look forward to these two titles if they are even remotely touched by AGS, but I really hope I'm wrong. Who knows, maybe the sleepy investors wake up and decide to replace these incompetent fools that are making the decisions now. But realistically, that is just wishful thinking. All that being said, every time I hear about a new MMO and I don't see AGS slapped on it, it gives me at least a little bit of hope. So for those of you that look at games like Chrono Odyssey and complain about Kakao or any other publisher, always think it could be worse. It could be AGS. Anyway, that's it for the video. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching. Feel free to subscribe, like, comment or don't. See you in the next one, gamers.